Beyond the pain, reclaiming my life after confronting my deepest regret. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. For 10 years, my biggest regret was ruining my life, until I realized I was pushed. I was standing in the pouring rain across from the towering glass facade of Vanguard Financial, my collar turned up against the chill. I work as a night shift janitor in the building next door, a ghost haunting the edges of a world I used to rule. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the executive suite, bathed in warm, expensive light, I saw him. Victor, my former mentor, the man I had looked up to like a father. He was smiling that same paternal, comforting smile, his heavy hand resting reassuringly on the shoulder of a young, eager-looking kid. The kid was nodding rapidly, practically vibrating with the nervous energy of a newly minted junior analyst. He looked exactly like me at 22. A cold wave of nausea washed over me, so intense I had to lean against a wet brick wall to stay upright. For a decade, I've lived in a cramped, damp basement apartment. I eat sheepkin soup, avoid mirrors, and flinch when sirens pass. I've carried the agonizing weight of believing I was a catastrophic failure, a careless idiot who accidentally triggered a massive corporate embezzlement algorithm and blew away $4 million of client money. To protect the people I loved from the blast radius of my supposed incompetence, I took a quiet plea deal. I served my time. Worse, I walked away from Sarah, the woman I was going to marry, vanishing into the night without a word to save her from being tethered to a convicted felon. I accepted my punishment because I thought I deserved it. I thought it was my fault. But watching Victor work his magic on that kid, the exact same body language, the exact same fatherly pat on the shoulder he gave me right before the audit dropped, the illusion shattered. The memories I had meticulously suppressed came flooding back, not as evidence of my guilt, but as puzzle pieces of a horrifying setup. I wasn't the architect of my destruction. I was the sacrificial lamb. And now, Victor was preparing the altar again. I watched the man who destroyed me place his hands on his next innocent victim. What do you do when your memories of absolute guilt turn out to be carefully planted lies? Standing in the rain, my mind violently pulled me back to that suffocating afternoon 10 years ago. I was 22, working as a junior developer for Victor's hedge fund. I had designed a high-frequency trading algorithm. I was brilliant, but completely naive. When the SEC audit flagged $4 million diverted into shell accounts, I panicked. Victor pulled me into his plush, mahogany-scented office and locked the door. He poured me a glass of scotch with trembling hands. "Elias, my boy," he had said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "There's a fatal flaw in your routing code. It's siphoning funds. If this goes to a full trial, the firm goes under. Hundreds lose their jobs. I lose everything." He played the desperate father figure perfectly. He told me that because I was young, a plea deal for criminal negligence would only mean a few months in a minimum security facility. "I'll take care of you when you get out," he promised, his eyes watering. "But if you fight it, they'll tear your life apart. Think of Sarah. The press will crucify her just for being engaged to you." That was the kill shot. The thought of dragging Sarah, brilliant, ambitious, fiercely loyal Sarah, through a media circus broke me. I was so overwhelmed, so terrified of ruining her life, that I didn't even hire my own lawyer. I used the guy Victor recommended. A guy who, in hindsight, practically shoved the pen into my hand to sign the confession. I spent 18 months in a federal camp, but the real prison was the isolation I chose afterward. I broke Sarah's heart by refusing to see her, changing my numbers, disappearing completely into the shadows. I thought I was being a martyr. I thought my sacrifice was the only honorable way out of a catastrophic mistake I had made. The sheer psychological manipulation it takes to convince an innocent kid to fall on his own sword is staggering. Victor didn't just steal my career. He hijacked my reality, replacing my truth with his meticulously crafted fiction. I traded my entire future away just to keep my beloved mentor out of prison. The next evening, I waited outside Vanguard Financial until the kid from the window walked out. He looked exhausted but buzzing with adrenaline, carrying a leather briefcase that looked too expensive for his age. I stepped out of the shadows, my janitor uniform hidden under a heavy trench coat. "Hey," I said, my voice raspy from disuse. "You work for Victor, right? I need to talk to you." He flinched, pulling his coat tighter. "Who are you?" If you're asking for money, I don't carry cash. I held my hands up. No, I used to work where you work. 10 years ago. Please, just listen. Whatever project you're building for him, whatever code you're compiling, check the secondary routing protocols. Check the outbound ledgers. He frowned, his defensive posture relaxing slightly into arrogant confusion. How do you know about the routing protocols? I took a step closer. Because I built the original architecture. My name is Elias. I'm telling you, he isolates you. He makes you feel indispensable, and then he uses your code to move money off the books. The kid, Toby, according to his security badge, scoffed. A patronizing smile spread across his face. It was the smile of someone who had already drunk the Kool-Aid. Look, man, I don't know what your problem is, but Victor is a visionary. He warned me there would be jealous people trying to undermine our work. He's setting you up to take the fall for a massive theft. I pleaded, feeling the desperation claw at my throat. Toby rolled his eyes and started walking away. But before he disappeared into the subway entrance, he threw a sentence over his shoulder that stopped my heart. Victor is like a father to me. He says I'm the son he never had. The air left my lungs. It wasn't just a similar situation. It was the exact same script. The exact same psychological grooming, beat for beat, word for word. The trap was already set, the jaws wide open and waiting for Toby to step in. Hearing those exact words fall from his lips made my blood run absolutely ice cold. I didn't sleep that night. By dawn, I was standing in front of a rusted roll-up door at a self-storage facility on the edge of the city. The air smelled of damp cardboard, motor oil, and decay. Inside Unit 414 were 3 plastic bins. They held the entirety of my former life. For 10 years, I had treated this place like a radioactive containment zone, terrified that opening these boxes would unleash a level of grief I couldn't survive. My hands shook so violently I could barely fit the small brass key into the padlock. The metallic click echoed in the quiet, dusty corridor like a gunshot. I pulled the heavy door up and dragged the first bin out into the harsh fluorescent light. The physical pain of looking at my past was excruciating. Right on top was a framed photo of Sarah and me at a beach house, laughing, our faces pressed together. Her eyes were so bright. Beneath it was the small velvet box I had left behind on our kitchen counter the night I disappeared, containing the diamond ring I had spent 6 months saving for. My chest tightened, a familiar, suffocating panic rising in my throat. I had broken her heart into a million pieces. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my ribs. But I couldn't stop now. I dug deeper, past the artifacts of a murdered romance, until my fingers hit cold, hard plastic. It was a massive external hard drive, wrapped in a protective static sleeve. Before I had surrendered to Victor's lawyer, I had frantically backed up my workstation, hoping to find my mistake. I had never looked at it again, too ashamed of what I believed it contained. I plugged it into my ancient, battered laptop right there on the concrete floor of the storage unit. The screen flickered to life, illuminating the dim space. I opened the master directory. File dates flashed on the screen. October 2015. The exact month everything went to hell. The numbers, the logs, the raw code were all sitting right there, waiting in the dark. Buried beneath my ruined life was the physical evidence that could finally set me free. Sitting on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit, I stared at the lines of code scrolling across my cracked laptop screen. 10 years ago, I looked at this data through the eyes of a panicked, terrified kid who had been told exactly what he was supposed to see. Now, I was looking at it with a decade of harsh, cynical clarity. I ignored the primary ledgers and dug directly into the back-end compiler logs. What do you do when your memories of guilt turn out to be lies? You look for the ghost in the machine. I started tracing the exact timestamps of the massive $4 million anomaly. It took 3 hours of relentless searching, my eyes burning in the dim light. And then, there it was. A tiny, elegant string of executable code hidden within a patch update. It was a backdoor routing protocol, designed to siphon microfractions of a cent from thousands of trades and dump them into an offshore shell. But here was the smoking gun. The patch update had been pushed at 3:14 a.m. on a Sunday. I checked my own building access logs from the secondary HR folder I had scraped. On that Sunday, at 3:14 a.m., I was 300 miles away at a wedding with Sarah. I couldn't have written the code. I couldn't have executed the patch. I dug deeper into the system authorization logs. The credentials used to push the malicious update belonged to a master admin account, an account that only 2 people in the entire company had access to. Me and Victor. He hadn't just taken advantage of a mistake I made. He had deliberately authored the virus, injected it into my project, and then masterfully gaslit me into believing I was the one who had written it. He framed me to cover his own theft. The sheer, sociopathic cruelty of it paralyzed me. I wasn't a tragic failure. I was the victim of a perfectly executed professional assassination. The chilling realization hit me that my entire decade of suffering was a calculated murder. Finding Sarah wasn't difficult. She had channeled the wreckage of our past into a formidable career as an investigative forensic auditor for a major regulatory firm. Calling her was the hardest thing I've ever done. When I heard her voice on the phone, sharp, professional, impatient, my throat closed up completely. "Sarah," I whispered. There was a dead, agonizing silence on the line. Then, a sharp intake of breath. "Elias?" she asked, her voice trembling before hardening into absolute steel. "How dare you call me? Do not ever contact me again." I begged her, pleading for just 10 minutes of her time. I told her it was about Victor. That name was the only thing that kept her from hanging up. We met at a sterile, brightly lit diner halfway between our respective lives. When she walked in, the breath left my lungs. She was still incredibly beautiful, but there was a hardness around her eyes that I had put there. She sat across from me, her posture rigid, her arms crossed tight against her chest, as if to physically protect herself from my presence. 10 years, she said, her voice shaking with a rage that had been simmering for a decade. You let me believe you were a criminal. You let me plan a wedding while you were negotiating a plea deal. You walked out and left me to face the media, our families, and the absolute humiliation alone. Why? Because Victor told me that if I fought, they would drag you down with me. I said, my voice breaking. I thought I was saving you. I thought I was guilty. She let out a bitter, cynical laugh that cut me to the bone. You didn't save me, Elias. You destroyed me. You took away my choice. I swallowed the massive lump of guilt in my throat and reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the printed access logs, the code snippets, and the timestamps I had extracted from the hard drive in the storage unit. I slid the manila folder across the sticky Formica table. I looked into her furious, heartbroken eyes and handed over the definitive proof of my innocence. Sarah stared at the manila folder like it was a loaded weapon. For a long, agonizing minute, she refused to touch it. Then, the clinical instincts of a forensic auditor took over. She snapped the folder open and began reading. I watched her eyes track back and forth across the printed lines of code and the server timestamps. The color slowly drained from her face. Her breathing hitched as she cross-referenced the dates with the administrative access logs. She was a professional. She knew exactly what she was looking at. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The man who had acted as a grieving mentor to us both all those years ago was the actual architect of our nightmare. He used his master admin override, she whispered, her voice tight with shock. He pushed the update while you were out of state, then wiped the terminal history. It's so clear. God, Elias, it's so incredibly clear. She looked up at me, and for a fraction of a second, the ice in her eyes melted into the profound sorrow of what we had lost. But the vulnerability vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a terrifying, cold fury. Don't mistake this for forgiveness, she said sharply, closing the folder and pulling it toward her side of the table. You still ran away. You still made the choice not to trust me 10 years ago. I am not doing this to absolve you, Elias. I know, I said softly, accepting the boundaries she was drawing. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need to stop him from doing it again. He's grooming a new kid named Toby. He's setting up the exact same fall. Sarah's jaw tightened. She meticulously packed the folder into her leather briefcase. Victor ruined my life too, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He manipulated me into believing the man I loved was a thief. He is not getting away with this again. I have the tools to track his offshore movements. We were bound together again by the shared, burning desire to see a monster finally burn. For the next 3 days, my cramped basement apartment became a war room. Sarah brought her high-powered encrypted laptops, and together, we dove into the digital abyss. Working alongside her again was a bizarre torture. Our professional rhythm was flawless, exactly as it had been a decade ago, but the emotional chasm between us was vast and heavy. We started with the $4 million Victor had stolen using my code. Sarah used her regulatory access to pull archived Swift wire transfers from that specific month. We tracked the stolen funds as they fractured into dozens of smaller, disguised transactions, bouncing through shadow banks in Cyprus, the Caymans, and the Isle of Man. "Look at this pattern," Sarah said, pointing a manicured nail at her glowing screen. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. "He's using a classic layering technique, but he's lazy. He relies on the same 3 registered agents in Panama for his shell companies." She started cross-referencing those old Panamanian agents with current corporate filings in Delaware. It took 14 straight hours of data mining, fueled by stale coffee and sheer adrenaline. Suddenly, she stopped typing. "I found him," she breathed. She pulled up the incorporation documents for a new, heavily funded tech incubator called Apex Ventures. Victor was listed as an advisory board member, safely distanced from direct liability. "Who was the principal signatory?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sarah clicked on the executive officer appendix. "Toby Hendricks," she read aloud. "The kid." Victor had positioned Toby as the sole legal owner and liable party for a massive corporate entity that was currently absorbing tens of millions in questionable overseas capital. When the feds inevitably raided Apex Ventures for money laundering, Victor would be an innocent bystander, and Toby would face 20 years in federal prison for signing documents he didn't understand. The deadly trap was already closed, and the final financial guillotine was preparing to fall. The magnitude of Victor's new scheme made my old case look like petty theft. Sarah hacked into the public registry for upcoming corporate mergers and found the timeline. "Friday," she announced, running a stressed hand through her hair. "Apex Ventures is closing a massive acquisition of a distressed real estate portfolio on Friday at 5 p.m. The capital moving into those escrow accounts is dirty, Elias. Extremely dirty. If Toby's signature goes on the final closing documents, he crosses the point of no return. The federal wire fraud charges alone will lock him away for the rest of his natural life." It was Wednesday night. We were rapidly running out of time. I paced the short length of my damp basement apartment, the claustrophobia of the situation pressing heavily down on my chest. "We have to go to the authorities immediately," I pleaded. "We hand over your audit trail and my old server logs. We let the FBI handle it." Sarah shook her head violently, her eyes flashing with frustration. "No, you know how the federal bureaucracy works. If we hand this to a local field office, it will sit on a supervisor's desk for 3 weeks waiting for a subpoena. By the time they authorize a raid, Toby will have already signed the papers and the money will be gone. Victor is too smart. He'll vanish the funds and leave the kid holding the bag." She was absolutely right. The legal system had completely failed me 10 years ago because it was designed to crush the weakest link in the chain. If we tried to play by the rules, Victor would simply leverage his immense wealth and high-priced legal team to delay the investigation while he threw Toby to the wolves. We needed a surgical strike. We needed undeniable, catastrophic exposure that would physically prevent Toby from putting pen to paper, while simultaneously trapping Victor in a room with his own undeniable crimes. We had exactly 48 hours to stop a horrific disaster from destroying an innocent life. Thursday morning, I couldn't take the anxiety of waiting. I made a reckless, desperate choice. I put on my only decent suit, 10 years out of style and loose on my thin frame, and walked into the executive lobby of Vanguard Financial. I bypassed security, slipping into the private elevator alongside a group of executives, and rode up to the top floor. I burst into Victor's massive corner office. He was sitting behind his mahogany desk, looking exactly as wealthy and untouchable as I remembered. When he saw me, he didn't panic. He didn't even flinch. He just leaned back in his leather chair, steeled his hands, and offered a cruel, amused smile. "Elias," he purred smoothly, "you look terrible. Have you been eating?" "I know about Toby," I snarled, planting my hands firmly on his desk. "I know about Apex Ventures. I have the original back-end server logs from 10 years ago. I know you used your master override to frame me, and I know you're doing the exact same thing to him." Victor didn't blink. He calmly poured himself a glass of sparkling water. "And who is going to believe you?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You are a convicted felon, Elias. A paranoid ex-convict harassing his former employer. If you go to the police, I will have you arrested for extortion by lunch. I'll bury you so deep you won't see sunlight until you're 60. He stood up, walking slowly around the desk until he was inches from my face. The scent of his expensive cologne made my stomach churn. "I also know you've been speaking with Sarah," he whispered maliciously. "She has built quite a respectable career at the Regulatory Commission. It would be an absolute tragedy if someone tipped off her superiors that she was unlawfully accessing classified financial archives to help her deranged, criminal ex-boyfriend. She would be disbarred, fired, and prosecuted." He patted my shoulder, exactly as he had done 10 years ago. The monster sitting across from me held all the cards, and he was smiling brightly. I stumbled out of the Vanguard building, my vision blurring with pure panic. The cold rain soaked through my cheap suit, but I barely felt it. Victor had found the one lever that could still break me. 10 years ago, I threw my life away to protect Sarah from a scandal. Now, he was explicitly threatening to destroy her hard-earned career, to drag her down into the mud with me if I dared to expose his crimes. By the time I reached my basement apartment, I was hyperventilating. Sarah was sitting at the makeshift desk, furiously typing away at her encrypted laptop. "We have the final sequence," she said without looking up. "I've linked his offshore shell to the Apex escrow account." "Stop," I gasped, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "Sarah, you have to stop right now. We have to shut this down." She froze, turning slowly to look at my pale, drenched face. "What did you do, Elias?" I confessed everything. I told her about my reckless confrontation with Victor and the devastating threat he had made against her career. "I can't let him ruin you," I pleaded, the familiar, suffocating weight of my old regrets crushing my chest. "I'm not doing it again. I'm not letting you become collateral damage because of me. I'm walking away. Let him have his victory. It's not worth your entire future." Sarah stood up slowly, her chair scraping harshly against the concrete floor. She didn't look scared. She looked absolutely furious. She crossed the small room in 2 strides, closing the distance between us. "You arrogant, stupid coward," she hissed, her voice trembling with intense rage. "Do you think you have the right to make that choice for me again? You don't get to play the tragic martyr this time." She pushed me hard against the damp wall, her eyes blazing with a fierce, uncompromising fire. "I am not a fragile little girl you need to protect. I am taking him down, with or without you." She grabbed my collar, demanding that I finally stand up and fight for my life. Sarah's fierce refusal to back down snapped me out of my paralyzing fear. I had let Victor dictate my reality for 10 years. I was not going to let him dictate another minute. It was Friday evening, 6 o'clock. Victor was hosting the annual Vanguard Financial Philanthropic Gala in the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. It was a massive, catered event filled with hundreds of wealthy investors, board members, and local politicians. It was also the perfect cover for him to quietly have Toby sign the final Apex Ventures closing documents in a private suite upstairs. We knew the schedule because Sarah had hacked the hotel's private reservation manifest. Sarah used her regulatory credentials to bypass the front security desk, flashing a badge that intimidated the guards into waving us through. I was wearing a borrowed tuxedo that fit decently enough to blend in, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. In my pocket was a single, encrypted USB drive. It contained a comprehensive, undeniable presentation. The original server logs proving Victor framed me, the swift transfer receipts of the stolen $4 million, and the direct digital link proving Victor was the hidden mastermind behind the fraudulent Apex Ventures acquisition. It was absolute poison for his entire empire. "The audiovisual booth is on the mezzanine overlooking the ballroom," Sarah whispered, linking her arm through mine as we navigated the crowded, opulent lobby. "I'll plug the drive directly into the main projector feed. I can override their local network and cast the documents onto the main screens during his keynote speech." I nodded, scanning the sea of expensive suits and diamond jewelry. "I need to find Toby before he goes up to the private suite," I replied grimly. "If he signs those papers before the screen lights up, he's legally liable, no matter what we expose." We stepped into the lavish ballroom, entirely prepared to detonate a massive financial suicide bomb. The ballroom lights dimmed as Victor stepped up to the podium, bathed in a solitary, dramatic spotlight. The crowd fell silent, hanging on his every charismatic word. I spotted Toby near the side exit, clutching a leather folio, looking nervous. I sprinted through the crowd, grabbing the kid's arm just as he reached for the door handle. "Don't move," I hissed, pinning him against the wall. Before he could protest, a loud electronic screech echoed through the massive speaker system. The massive screens behind Victor flickered, went black, and then violently exploded with blinding white data. Sarah had done it. Massive, high-resolution images of Victor's offshore bank accounts, the fraudulent transaction logs, and the malicious code he used to frame me flashed sequentially across the 50-foot screens. The ballroom erupted into chaotic murmurs. Victor froze, his charming smile dropping into a mask of pure horror. "This is a malicious hack," he shouted into the microphone, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "Security, shut down the projectors immediately." I stepped out of the shadows and walked straight down the center aisle, directly toward the stage. "It's not a hack, Victor." I projected my voice over the rising chaos. "It's the truth." I turned to the crowd, pointing directly at the screens. 10 years ago, he framed me for a $4 million theft to cover his own tracks. Tonight, he's using Apex Ventures to launder $50 million, and he's setting up that young man by the door to take the fall. I pointed back at Toby, who was staring at the undeniable evidence on the screen, his face drained of all color. He dropped the folio containing the unsigned documents onto the floor. Victor was frantically screaming at the sound technicians, his polished veneer completely shattered. The investors were already pulling out their phones, dialing their lawyers. The untouchable titan of finance stood completely naked in the blinding light of the truth. The aftermath was immediate and brutally catastrophic for Victor. Several board members present in the room were also managing directors of the funds Victor was actively defrauding. Within 20 minutes, federal agents, likely tipped off by Sarah's anonymous data dump earlier that afternoon, breached the ballroom doors. I watched with a profound, quiet stillness as they placed Victor in handcuffs and escorted him out past the flashing cameras of the local press. He didn't look like a titan anymore. He just looked old, pathetic, and terrified. Toby approached me in the chaotic lobby, trembling violently. He shook my hand, tears welling in his eyes, thanking me for saving his life. The legal untangling took months. Sarah's meticulous audit provided the FBI with a silver platter conviction. Victor's legal team folded under the sheer weight of the digital evidence. The judge presiding over my original case reviewed the new logs and officially vacated my felony conviction, declaring a full exoneration. The day the paperwork was finalized, I walked out of the courthouse and took a deep breath of fresh air. It felt entirely different. The invisible, crushing weight I had carried in my chest for 10 years was finally gone. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I actually existed. Sarah was waiting for me at the bottom of the concrete steps. The hostility that had defined our recent interactions had softened, replaced by a quiet, cautious mutual respect. "So," she said, wrapping her coat tight against the autumn wind, "you're officially an innocent man. What are you going to do now?" I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman I had loved and lost, and the fierce warrior who had helped me reclaim my soul. I knew we couldn't just magically erase the past and go back to who we were. But we had forged something entirely new in the fire. For the first time in a decade, I looked at her without carrying overwhelming guilt. There was no magical fairy tale ending for Sarah and me. You don't just endure 10 years of trauma, betrayal, and heartbreak and immediately ride off into the sunset together. The damage was too deep, the scars too visible. We didn't get back together, but we did become friends. Genuine, honest friends who shared a bond forged in absolute fire. We meet for coffee once a month, and for the first time in my adult life, I can sit across from her and genuinely smile. I finally moved out of that damp, suffocating basement apartment. With my record officially expunged, I accepted a mid-level cybersecurity consulting job. I am slowly, deliberately rebuilding my life, one small, quiet step at a time. Looking back at the nightmare, the hardest part wasn't the prison sentence or the poverty. The absolute hardest part was the self-hatred. When you are gaslit into believing you are inherently toxic, you destroy your own life faster than any enemy ever could. I allowed Victor's lie to define my entire existence. I exiled myself because I thought I deserved to suffer. If you are out there carrying the agonizing weight of a past mistake, I urge you to look closer. Unpack the boxes. Question the narrative you've been fed, especially if it was handed to you by someone who benefited from your silence. You cannot heal while you are living in the shadows of a lie. Confronting the darkest, most painful parts of your past is terrifying. It requires opening doors you swore you would keep locked forever. But avoiding the pain only allows the poison to spread. You have to stand up, face the ghosts, and demand your reality back. It took me a decade of living in hell to finally realize that I held the keys to my own cage all along. Reclaiming your life requires immense courage. The truth will always set you free, but first, it will burn your world down.